The rain had begun before noon, falling in a thin, relentless sheet that blurred the city streets and sent most people scurrying indoors. Ethan Miller, however, welcomed it. He enjoyed the anonymity rain provided, how it muffled footsteps and encouraged solitude. With an umbrella tucked under his arm, he made his way toward the library, an old brick building that smelled faintly of paper and dust, a sanctuary he had been retreating to more often these days. At 28, Ethan still appeared youthful, but lately he carried himself with a kind of quiet fatigue. His marriage to Daniel Carter had once been a glowing promise, full of shared dreams and laughter over late-night dinners. Now, it was defined by silence. Daniel's career consumed him. His phone never left his hand, and conversations at the dinner table had dwindled into brief exchanges about schedules and bills. Ethan did not resent Daniel exactly. He admired his ambition, but he missed the intimacy that had once been second nature between them. That afternoon, the library seemed emptier than usual. A few students bent over laptops, and the rustle of pages echoed faintly in the cavernous room. Ethan wandered among the shelves without much purpose. He told himself he was looking for a novel, something to pass the long hours that stretched endlessly in the evenings when Daniel came home late, but in truth, he wanted distraction from the gnawing loneliness he could no longer name aloud. He stopped at the fiction section, eyes scanning the spines without focus, until a voice startled him. Looking for anything in particular? Ethan turned. Behind the counter stood a man about his age, perhaps slightly older, with dark hair swept back neatly and a calm confidence in his posture. His name tag read Oliver Grant. The librarian's smile was polite, yet carried a spark of curiosity, as if he had already noticed something in Ethan worth studying. "I'm not sure," Ethan admitted, his voice quieter than intended. "Maybe something new. Something different." Oliver stepped out from behind the counter and approached the shelves with easy assurance. His presence had an unexpected warmth, like sunlight breaking through cloud cover. He ran a finger along the row of titles before selecting one and handing it to Ethan. "Try this. It's about love, betrayal, and the choices that come with both. Not light reading, but it lingers with you." Ethan accepted the book, glancing at the title. The irony of the subject matter unsettled him, though he said nothing. He noticed instead the steadiness of Oliver's gaze, how it lingered just long enough to suggest genuine interest. "Thank you," Ethan murmured. "Any time," Oliver replied, his smile widening slightly. "I see you here often, though mostly wandering. Maybe now you'll have a reason to come back." The words were casual, but they left a trace of implication that Ethan could not ignore. He felt a faint rush of color in his cheeks, surprised by his own reaction. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him with that particular blend of friendliness and attentiveness. Daniel used to look at him like that, long ago. Ethan checked out the book and left soon after, but the librarian's expression followed him out into the drizzle. On the walk home, he held the novel tightly under his arm, as if protecting it from the rain, though he realized it wasn't the story inside he was guarding. It was the memory of Oliver's voice, the curiosity in his eyes, the suggestion, real or imagined, that Ethan was more than just another anonymous patron. Home offered little comfort. Daniel was in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing absently at Ethan when he entered. Their dinner was eaten with minimal conversation, the silence punctuated only by the tap of Daniel's fingers on his screen. Ethan opened the book later that night, but the words blurred together. What stayed clear was Oliver's smile, the way it had made him feel unexpectedly seen. He closed the novel after a few pages, resting it on the nightstand. Daniel had already fallen asleep, turned away from him, the space between them vast though the bed was narrow. Ethan stared at the ceiling in the darkness, listening to the steady rain outside. For the first time in years, something stirred within him, a restlessness, a flicker of curiosity he had thought, long extinguished. Was it the book he had borrowed, or something else entirely? He could not say, but Ethan knew one thing with certainty: the library no longer felt like just a refuge from loneliness. It had become a place where possibility waited, quietly, behind the eyes of a man named Oliver Grant. Ethan returned to the library the following week under the pretense of curiosity, though he had already admitted to himself that the book was not the real reason. He carried it back unread and felt a faint thrill of anticipation when he saw Oliver standing behind the counter. The librarian greeted him with the same unhurried smile, as if he had been expecting Ethan. "Finished it already?" Oliver asked, tilting his head toward the novel in Ethan's hand. "Not quite," Ethan confessed, sliding the book across the desk. "I couldn't focus." Oliver studied him for a moment, then leaned against the counter. "Maybe the book wasn't the distraction you needed. Sometimes it's not about the story, but about who shares it with you." The words struck Ethan more deeply than they should have. He laughed softly, hoping it would disguise the pull he felt, but Oliver's gaze was steady, almost deliberate in its patience. That day, Oliver recommended another title, then another the week after. The books became excuses, tokens exchanged so Ethan could justify his visits. What he anticipated was not the literature, but the conversations. Oliver's questions about his favorite authors, his thoughts on art, his half-playful arguments about whether love stories ever deserved happy endings. These exchanges filled Ethan with a vitality he had been starving for, the kind Daniel no longer offered at home. Soon, Ethan timed his visits to coincide with the quieter hours of the library. Their talks stretched longer, sometimes carrying them into closing time. On one such evening as the last of the patrons left, Oliver locked the door and returned to find Ethan still lingering near the shelves. "You're avoiding the rain again," Oliver remarked. His tone was light, but the room seemed to still with the words. "Maybe," Ethan admitted, "or maybe I like being here." There was no mistaking the intent behind his voice, though neither man spoke it aloud. Instead, Oliver moved closer, close enough that Ethan could see the flecks of green in his otherwise brown eyes. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It vibrated with something unspoken, something both feared and wanted. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the book Oliver had set aside for him. Their fingers brushed, lingering longer than necessary. It was a simple touch, but it felt weighted like a line being crossed. Ethan did not pull away. "You look tired," Oliver said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "Or maybe just lonely." The word landed like a confession Ethan had never dared make. His throat tightened, but instead of answering, he let the silence acknowledge the truth. Oliver's hand rested briefly on his, warm and steady. It should have been nothing, innocent passing, but it wasn't. The following week, the pattern continued. Ethan left home claiming late hours at work, though his destination was the same library. Each visit brought them closer, each conversation more revealing. Oliver asked about Ethan's marriage once, cautiously, and Ethan answered with vague honesty. "We're not the same as we used to be." That admission seemed to free something in both of them. The boundaries of politeness crumbled. One evening, as Ethan prepared to leave, Oliver stopped him at the doorway. Neither spoke. Oliver's hand brushed against his cheek, tentative, searching for permission. Ethan hesitated, only long enough to feel the weight of what he was about to betray. Then he leaned in. Their lips met with an urgency restrained by fear, a kiss that was hesitant, yet electric. It was over quickly, but it shattered the fragile wall Ethan had built around his loneliness. He stepped back, his pulse racing, shame and exhilaration colliding inside him. "I shouldn't have," Ethan began, but Oliver cut him off gently. "You don't have to explain. Just be honest with yourself." The words echoed in Ethan's mind as he walked home in the dark. Daniel was already asleep when he entered the apartment, his face lit faintly by the glow of his phone screen before he rolled over. Ethan stood in the doorway, torn between guilt and a hunger he could not silence. The kiss had been brief, but it had ignited something he knew could not be easily extinguished. And when Oliver's voice replayed in his memory, "Come back tomorrow. There's more I want to show you," Ethan realized that he would. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Ethan could neither resist nor fully admit. Each afternoon he rehearsed excuses, meetings that ran late, errands that demanded time, and each evening he found himself back at the library or in Oliver's company elsewhere. What began as hesitant conversations in the aisles soon spilled into whispered confidences over coffee, then into embraces stolen in dimly lit corners. For the first time in years, Ethan felt alive. With Oliver, laughter came easily unforced. The weight that pressed against his chest whenever he sat across from Daniel at dinner seemed to vanish in Oliver's presence. Yet that relief came with a counterweight of guilt. Every kiss deepened the fracture inside him. One half tethered to the vows he had once spoken, the other drawn irresistibly toward a man who offered what Daniel no longer gave. At home, the gulf widened. Daniel, though not unkind, remained absent even when present. He worked late, fell asleep with his phone in hand, and responded to Ethan's attempts at conversation with distracted nods. One evening, Ethan mentioned the book Oliver had recommended, testing whether Daniel would notice the shift in his routine. Daniel only muttered, "That's good," without lifting his eyes from his screen. The hollowness of that response lingered long after, echoing louder than words ever could. Oliver, in contrast, listened with intent. He asked about Ethan's dreams, his disappointments, the small details that made him who he was. One night, sitting across from each other in a quiet cafe, Ethan found himself confessing more than he intended. "I used to believe marriage meant permanence," Ethan said, staring into his untouched drink, "that if you loved someone enough, it would carry you through anything. But lately, it feels like I'm living beside a stranger." Oliver did not interrupt. He simply reached across the table, his hand covering Ethan's in a gesture of understanding. The silence that followed was thick, but not empty. It was permission, acceptance. "Maybe it's not about permanence," Oliver said at last. "Maybe it's about finding where you still feel seen." The simplicity of the statement cut through Ethan's turmoil. It was what he had been yearning for, but could not name, to be recognized, acknowledged, valued. Yet even as he leaned further into Oliver's orbit, guilt shadowed every step. Lying beside Daniel at night, Ethan replayed the hours he had spent elsewhere, the words and touches he dared not confess. He wondered if Daniel sensed the distance, if the faint stiffness in his voice or the guarded glances gave him away. One evening, Daniel's tone shifted unexpectedly. As they cleared the dishes, he asked, "You've been out a lot lately. Everything okay?" Ethan froze, the fork in his hand suddenly heavy. He forced a smile. "Just work. You know how it is." Daniel nodded slowly, though the hesitation in his expression revealed suspicion. Yet he did not press further, returning instead to the glow of his phone. Ethan felt both relief and despair. Relief that the lie held, despair that Daniel had not cared enough to challenge it. The tension reached its peak when Ethan finally admitted the truth to Oliver. They were walking together near the library after closing, the night air sharp with the scent of rain. Ethan stopped, words tumbling out before he could reconsider. "I'm married," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Oliver's expression flickered with pain, though not surprise. "I guessed," he replied quietly. "I just hoped maybe you'd tell me." Ethan's chest tightened. "I didn't mean to fall into this." Oliver finished for him. His voice was gentle, not accusing. "You don't have to explain, but you do have to decide. Are you going to keep hiding, or are you going to choose?" The question lodged deep, more piercing than any accusation could have been. Ethan had no answer. That night, he stood at the window of his apartment while Daniel slept in the next room. The city lights flickered in the distance, rain streaking the glass. Ethan pressed his forehead against the cold pane, torn between loyalty to vows that felt hollow and the fierce, undeniable pull of the man who had awakened something inside him. He did not yet know which path he would take, but he understood with sudden clarity that the book he had borrowed weeks ago had not been about pages or words. It had been the beginning of a story that demanded a choice, one that could no longer be avoided. And as the rain fell harder outside, Ethan whispered to himself what he could not yet admit to either man: "Something has to change.